Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Boston Region MPO UPWP committee meeting. So just a heads up to get started, I'll read off the accessibility statement here. So this meeting is being recorded. This meeting is accessible to persons with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with some exceptions with the following standards: the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards, and the revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations or have any technical concerns in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Matt Archer, MPO staff, at marcher@ctps.org or at 857-702-3704. All right, so we'll get kicked off with introductions here and a roll call. So I'm Ben Muller, representing the MassDOT Office of Transportation Planning. And I will list here. Eric Braza. Don't think he's in here. Let's see, Daniel Amstutz. Don't think anyone from Arlington is here either. Let's see, BPDA. Tom Katzis.
Unmute. Here, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
Thank you. Erica Jerem.
Erica Jerem is present.
Thanks. Let's see, anyone from the SWAP region here, Town of Medway? All right. David Kosis.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. David Kosis at Large Cities, representing Mayor Fuller.
Okay, thank you, David. Tom O'Rourke.
Hi, good morning. Tom O'Rourke, Town of Norwood, representing Trick.
Thank you. Tom Bent.
Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Joe Curtatone and the Inner Core.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And Lynn Diggins.
Here, and representing the advisory council. Sorry about the mask. I'm at work and we have to wear masks all the time, unless we're eating.
All right, so looks like that does it for the roll call.
I believe Daniel Amstutz has now arrived. Yes.
Sure. Daniel, you want to say hello for the roll?
Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, representing Select Board Chair John Hurd and MPO area towns.
Awesome, thanks. All right, so we'll move on to agenda item 2. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the UPWP committee today? If so, you can just hit the reactions button and click raise hand, or you can unmute and start speaking if you'd like. Seeing none, so we'll move on to agenda item number 4 here, the tentative FFY 2022 UPWP development schedule. Sandy?
I think we need to do the approval of the previous meeting summary.
Oh, I did skip that one. All right, so let's move back to agenda item 3, the summary of the November 19th meeting. Can I get a motion in a second to approve the meeting summary as posted?
Motion to approve.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll go through the roll here. Daniel Amstutz.
Yes.
Tom Katzis.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Erica Jerem.
I abstain. I was not in attendance.
David Kosis.
David Kosis, yes.
Tom O'Rourke.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Tom Bent.
Yes.
And Lynn Diggins.
Yes.
Great. And MassDOT votes yes. So motion passes. So now we'll move on to agenda item 4, the tentative FFY 2022 UPWP development schedule. Sandy?
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, so I'm going to actually do something revolutionary that I rarely do at these meetings and share my screen. But first, I'm going to put a link in the chat. This is a page that you might all be familiar with. It's the development page for the new UPWP. But I'm also going to share it on the screen, if you give me a second. And basically, this walks everybody through the large-scale development schedule for the new UPWP. It's not really any different than what we've done in previous years. We're at the stage where we are starting to discuss the list of studies that will eventually be funded and aiming to endorse the UPWP by summer. We've had some discussions with MassDOT and our federal partners about potentially endorsing the UPWP later. Last year, I think we endorsed it on July 16th, and we're going to aim for probably around then or possibly August. So it'll be a more relaxed schedule than many years in the past, but probably pretty similar to what we did last year. So I'm going to stop sharing the overall schedule, and I'm actually going to switch to sharing a PowerPoint with a little bit more in the way of details. So can everybody see that?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so just to give you an idea of where we are in the process right now, I have been doing a lot of outreach and talking to people. We have a survey out on the web facing the public, asking for ideas for studies. And right now we're at the stage where that's starting to wrap up. The survey is still open. It'll be going out in other languages, but we haven't received the translation yet. So we're going to keep it open to keep hearing those ideas for a couple more weeks. And I'm really starting to process the ideas into what eventually will become the UPWP universe of proposed studies that you've all seen in the past. This is the schedule that I've put together just on a draft basis, and this is really, I want your feedback on this, if you have any, in terms of where we go from here with meetings to start developing the universe. So today, I want to kind of get your approval for this tentative schedule. 2 weeks from now, I'd like to have another meeting to discuss the very early stages of what will become the universe. And there's also an agenda item from today that we're going to have to put off to a future meeting. So I think that February 18th date would be a good date for that as well. But that won't be the kind of fully formed and formatted universe that you've seen. It'll be just kind of be some of the more of the raw information so that you can start to familiarize yourselves with some of the ideas that are circulating. Then on a month after that, on March 18th, staff would come back and we'd have that fully formatted universe to really dig into developing the list of studies, both from the committee's perspective, and staff would probably come to that meeting with our recommended list of studies as well. So that could be a meeting that could be very long potentially, or we could schedule a second meeting. One option would be to do a March 4th meeting and a March 18th meeting. But that would mean having 4 UPWP committee meetings in a row. The other option would be potentially to put that March 18th meeting after the MPO meeting so that we have as much time as necessary to dig into it. And then tentatively, and this is subject to how long the previous discussions take and when we on the staff side are able to get the budgets together, that we'd be aiming for the April 1st to have a ranked list of study concepts ready to go to pending funding. And that would be, that's not a joke, even though it is April 1st. All right, so yeah, so that's all I wanted to discuss for, all I wanted to share on the screen for the calendar discussion. And if anybody has any thoughts, please go ahead and Ben, you can call on them or people can unmute themselves.
Yeah, sure. Any thoughts for Sandy on the schedule here? Daniel?
I don't have any problem with the schedule. I was just wondering when the survey, when is that deadline to fill out the public survey?
So we don't have a hard deadline right now. I think it would be really good if we could get things in by no more than a week from today, but we're really kind of dependent on when those translations come in because we want to make sure that there's at least, say, a week for people who don't speak English to fill out the survey. But we've been waiting on that for a while.
Andy, I
Okay.
just want to clarify. I put it in the chat. The translated surveys have actually been up since Monday.
Oh, they have. Oh, I somehow I missed that. Okay, thanks, Kate.
Yeah, so they're available on the website as well as embedded in the current UPWP survey. So you sent out either link, either to the website or to the specific survey. All the translations are available.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry, I missed that. So let's say a week from today. Oh, sorry, a week from tomorrow, Friday the 12th.
Okay, thanks.
I'll chime in. Tom Cabs is here. How does this? I know that we have the tip process separated from the UPWP process. A pet objective of mine, maybe at some point, to actually get the processes in sync from an efficiency standpoint of public process input. Anyway, that's my soapbox thing. But Sandy, how's this compare with the tip schedule? We were usually about 2 weeks off, and I admit I don't have the schedule in front of me. Are we pretty much the same thing as last year?
So I think last year we ended up endorsing the UPWP up to a month late after the tip, or
Right.
maybe even longer. And I think where we've been leaning in recent years is that the UPWP schedule can be a little bit more relaxed, in large part because it puts a lot of stress on MPO agendas and on staff to be preparing them at the same time. So I don't know what the schedule is looking like for tip endorsement this year. Maybe Ben or somebody from the CTPS side can weigh in on that.
No, you know what, Sandy? No, thanks. Thanks for that input there. What you're saying makes sense. I don't disagree with it. I don't have any problem with the schedule. Thank you.
I can add a little something on the tip and UPWP schedules not being quite synced up. One of the drivers of that is that the tip schedule is really dependent on the CIP schedule, so that we can coordinate those efforts. And the CIP usually needs to go out and approved by the boards in June. And so that kind of forces our hand pretty early on the tip side, whereas the UPWP can stick closer to the federal schedule. So it gives us a little more freedom there.
Sandy, Benjamin, thanks for your some explanations there. They give me some good information. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom.
David?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm just looking at my calendar and I see on February 18th, we have an MPO meeting at 10, and then we have an MPO forum at 2 to 4. And I think if we add another meeting on the same day, it's just a lot of MPO meetings on one day. And, you know, I used to like that when we were traveling into Boston to group them together, but now I kind of feel the opposite. And I think it might be nice to divide the meetings up a little bit more. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean, that will be a very long day for me since I'm organizing the forum in the afternoon also, and presumably presenting at the MPO meeting. So the February 18th meeting is probably the least necessary one on this calendar. You know, in the past, we haven't necessarily shared any of the study input with the committee until we have the fully formatted universe. So if we want to skip that meeting, I can either email out some of the initial information to the committee so that you all have a chance to review it, but we don't need to meet, or we can you know, find something else to do. Maybe do March 4th instead of February 18th, and then we'd have March 4th and March 18th. So totally open to input there.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I recall from the last couple of years, the UPWP universe discussion has been pretty long. And so I think our thought in presenting sort of a pre-universe is to get some of that conversation started early so that we can go ahead and suss out some of the background questions behind the proposals before we have to get to voting. So I do think we will ultimately need 2 meetings to discuss the full universe, whether that's sort of a pre-universe and then a full universe meeting, or if that's 2 after we have the full universe starting on the 18th. I think one of the other items that we haven't really talked about as far as scheduling is, I know we were tied to the MPO meeting schedule for the same reason, because everyone had to come into the Tin Park Plaza to attend the meetings. But I suppose we could, in theory, shift off of that so that we had it on a week that wasn't an MPO meeting week to give us a little more time to speak up, to talk. I don't know how CTPS staff feels about that. That's just brainstorming.
I personally am open to that. I don't know how my superiors feel about that. So the options are, we could move it to March 4th, which is an MPO meeting day. So we still get that second meeting in. There's just a little bit less time in between, or we could leave it on February 18th. I think are probably the two best options, or we could move it to an off week.
If I may add,
Oh, good.
just because Sandy referenced me, I don't foresee any major challenges with that, but of course we'll just check in if there's some logistical problem, but I also am completely open to being more flexible in the day.
Well, I mean, in my opinion, I think it would be nice to leave us a chance during a day to do non-MPO things. So if we could, I mean, I would prefer to move that February 18th back a week, but I'm fine if nobody else wants to do that.
I'll just jump in and say, well, I'm glad that we're having more than one meeting to discuss the universe. And so whether that's discussed as a pre-universe meeting or the universe, I think it's good to have a couple meetings. I mean, I'm kind of with David on the full day of meetings, because just take into account there are those of us who are not getting paid to do this and have to like work, and so I can take off half a day to do this meeting, but I think I'm not going to be able to attend that TDM forum, as interesting as it may be. Thankfully, it'll be recorded, because I just can't, I think, do the whole day of meetings. It's not the lack of desire, just got work. So my question about the first is, those are going to be the ranked list of study concepts. So when are we going to ask people to do the ranking? It's going to be after the 18th, but before the 1st?
That's correct. Yeah. So what I'm envisioning is that, we will have a discussion of the universe on the 18th and dive into as much detail as folks want on asking questions about the individual studies and et cetera. And then I'll send out the surveys like I've done in past years to the committee, and we'll do our staff process internally as well after the 18th. And then we'll come to the meeting on April 1st with the data from the committee survey in hand, and staff will bring our ranked list of studies to that meeting as well. And the idea of that meeting will be to kind of synthesize and harmonize the data and the staff list as necessary, and come up with a final committee approved list.
All right. So at what point are we going to ask the public to do any kind of ranking? I kind of recall last year that we did, or is that a false memory?
I don't think we've ever put out to the survey, for example, to the public to do a full ranking of studies. I have typically brought the universe to the advisory council to discuss.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And the timing on this is a little bit awkward for that, because we like the committee to see the universe before anyone else.
Right.
And so if we're introducing the universe on March 18th, then the advisory council meeting for March will be before that.
Right.
But we'd also be asking to have a final list before the April advisory council meeting. So we'd have to work it out. I could probably show a draft to the advisory council at the March meeting.
Okay. All right. And or maybe they'll just force us to have a bonus meeting. That's so horrible. So, all right, thanks.
You sound really cut up about that one.
Oh yeah.
So it sounds to me like maybe going with March 4th instead of February 18th is the way to go.
The temperature I'm hearing, yeah. if you have strong feelings or something comes up sort of after the meeting, you can always email also. Daniel?
Oh, I have a conflict on the February 25th, so March 4th works fine with me if that works for staff and others.
All right. I think I have my marching instructions. So is there another hand up?
Nope, that looks like everyone. So is there more under the schedule here or?
Nope.
All right. So I guess we'll move on to agenda item 5, the potential changes in the 2022 UPWP. Sandy?
All right, excellent. So I'm actually going to keep sharing my screen. Okay. All right. So just a couple of quick proposed changes that I wanted the committee's feedback on for the document.
Actually seeing the presentation view, just a heads up.
You're seeing the presentation view. That's odd. Okay. One second. I'm going to stop my share and restart it. All right. Are you now seeing the full slides?
Yep.
Okay. So chapter 5 of the document, the UPWP document, as you know, contains kind of the contract work that staff perform on contract for MassDOT or the MBTA or other entities. This is generally the last part of the UPWP to get finalized because the schedules don't always align with the UPWP calendar. And the schedules for executing these contracts are often delayed, such that some contract work is never documented in any UPWP. So that's one of the challenges that I'm thinking through this year, and I'm going to go through the next one, then propose a couple of solutions. The other thing I'm thinking through is Appendix A of the UPWP document, which has the studies in the MPO region that are not funded by the MPO. So we have typically included both municipal studies and things done by the MassDOT and the MBTA, et cetera, whoever will give us the information. I think I've mentioned to the committee before that we find this data collection very difficult. We don't feel like we're getting a comprehensive look at what's going on around the region. And it takes up a lot of time, and it's also very late to finalize, which introduces some wrenches into the process. So the thing about this is that with Ben's help, I kind of looked into the federal regulations around this, and the core requirement for that is the reason that this appendix exists is to document studies that are funded by federal dollars. So in addition to MPO controlled unfunded work, we need to document anything that MassDOT's doing with their SPR contract, for example. But we don't, over time, the appendix has grown to a point where it's inclusive of a lot more work than we're actually federally required to report on. So just moving on to a couple of proposals that I've been tossing about and have discussed with other staff in terms of how to handle these challenges. The first proposal, and I think they're linked, right? Because we're talking about this issue of federal funding and non-federal funding, we can try and kill two birds with one stone if we want with these two challenges that we're facing. So my first proposal is to have Appendix A cover federally funded studies only, and we as staff will work to implement an interactive dashboard as time and resources and funding become available to document all of the studies going on around the region that will live on the MPO website. So it'll be more accessible than just a PDF document. For the PDF document of the UPWP itself, we will just do the core federal reporting that is required. In that proposal, Chapter 5, for the documenting the contract work, would remain as it is currently. My second proposal, which is maybe a little bit more ambitious, would be to combine the Appendix A, again, reporting only on the core federally funded studies, and Chapter 5. The new chapter would include a list of all the contract work and then a section on federally funded studies to be executed by other agencies. You may not have opinions on this. You might. I personally do not feel like I am confident in judging which of these is a better idea. I think proposal 1 is probably a little bit easier to do this year, but I am open to different ideas or questions about why this is a problem or how we should handle it.
Hey, thank you, Sandy. And I will add, there's one very minor wrinkle in the federally funded studies only requirement, in that the division office also likes to see any regionally significant non-federally funded projects. So in other regions, the examples are sort of like South Coast Rail has to be listed into Southeastern Mass MPO's UPWP because it's so impactful on their region, but it's not really using federal funds and it's certainly not using federal funds that they have any access to. So there are like some outliers like that, but those are sort of know them when you see them kind of cases. So Lynn, I think you had your hand up first.
Thank you. So, well, you had me at interactive dashboard, right? That's Lenny Bay, so, and especially, if it has a historical element to it, would it?
That would depend on funding and staff resource availability.
Well, okay.
I would love for it to, but it would be a challenge in many ways.
Well, at least going forward, though, from the point that you started it, so once it's in there, you could just keep it in and then add the future years to it, right?
Definitely, for sure.
Okay, great. Yeah, I would say, I understand where you're coming from, and certainly if you're saying the staff, is having a hard time with the current system, then we want to do what we can to make things easier. As you know, I want as comprehensive a view of what's going on as possible, so that when you have a question about what someone else has done and how it fits in with what you're doing, you have a place to go. So even if it takes a while to build that, I think it's worth building and devote resources to it as you have. And maybe at some point other people can help out. Thanks.
David?
So sometimes I just think that simpler is better, and I just want to, maybe I'm not quite understanding this, but so does proposal 1 mean that it would no longer be the case that someone can just go to one place, click on the document and see one list of all of the studies that the MPO is undertaking, regardless of if it's funded by federal or state or local or other dollars? It would just be a partial list and you'd have to look somewhere else for the rest of the projects? Is that what this means?
No. So what's at question is studies that are not being executed by the MPO. So what Appendix A covers is it's mostly MassDOT, MBTA, or municipal studies, some of which CTPS has a role in as a contractor, as some of which are funded by federal dollars like SPR, but it's a large percentage of the content, for example, is the city of Boston's plans, which we love to see, but it's not, because those are not funded with federal money, we're not actually required to document them.
But is the MPO, are you participating in those studies in some way?
In some cases, yes, but not in most of them.
I just think it would be good to, wouldn't it be beneficial to have a list of all the projects that that CTPS has some role in one place?
That is definitely something. Yeah, that's something we can consider. And in theory, that's what Chapter 5 is supposed to provide.
Okay.
Right.
So when you say as is, then that would stay how it is.
Right. Basically, yeah. Again, there's the problem that there are contracts that sometimes CTPS receives in between UPWPs, and the work starts and wraps up in between approvals of UPWP, so it never gets documented in a UPWP. But right now, we don't have an easy solution to that problem. Okay. But yes, in theory, Chapter 5 is supposed to document those cases where CTPS is doing the work paid for by someone else.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, Daniel?
Thanks. I guess maybe tracks with what Len was saying. I think Proposal 1 seems simpler. I'm actually kind of confused about Proposal 2 because I don't necessarily know the document backwards and front. So like combining Appendix A and Chapter 5, I don't really quite understand what would end up in there totally, and then like a new chapter. Anyway, I think so I don't quite understand what the implications of that are. And then 2 other thoughts, or what Ben was saying with other regionally important projects that are just big and important, would those go under or currently, do they go under Appendix A? And the other question is, oh, I'm sorry, I think I just lost it. It was related to, what you were just saying about the projects that are kind of in between UPWPs that somehow don't get documented. Why aren't those getting included as like a amendment or administrative, adjustment into the UPWP?
Yeah, so to answer your first question first, yes, those studies that would be of regional significance but are not being carried out by the MPO are in Appendix A. And that's kind of what that appendix is for. As for the second question, amendments and administrative modifications are specifically for 3C funded projects, for projects that are funded by core MPO funding. They do not apply to projects that are funded by on contract to other agencies. And so that's if we change what we're doing with 3C funding, then we have to execute an amendment or an adjustment. If we get a new contract on to do something for MassDOT or for the T, then we do not. Although we report it internally in other ways, and if Tegan or Annette or someone wants to, or Hiral wants to talk about that a little bit, we can do that. But that's not required to be in the UPWP.
Okay, yeah, I think it's just sort of the confusing nature of the work that CTPS does, as some of it federal, some of it not federal, or some of it, like you said, on contract. So you report it. So when you report in Chapter 5, it's like everything that's on contract, not just things that are federally, or it's specifically things that are on contract but not federally funded?
So this is what's confusing. It's a mixture. It's all things that CTPS is doing on contract to other entities. Some of that is the original funds are federal dollars. Some of it is not. Probably the most confusing element is that some of you may remember we used to have in the UPWP a category that we called MassDOT 5303, which are FTA Section 5303 funds which is basically transit planning funds that MassDOT controls and sometimes would fund projects executed by CTPS on contract to MassDOT or the MBTA. Those funds are now wrapped up into the 3C contract and not called out separately. However, projects funded by those funds are still in Chapter 5 because they are still contract work. In addition, anything we do for MassDOT funded by MassDOT's SPR contract with federal highways is in Chapter 5 because it is, from our perspective as MPO staff, contract work, even though the original funding is federal dollars. So yes, it's very confusing and it's very complex, and that's part of why this is always the last thing to finalize.
Yeah, and I think I'll add to that so the key distinction essentially is Chapter 5 is CTPS is doing this work for somebody else that isn't the MPO. And Appendix A is, in theory, CTPS is not doing this work, but it's important to the Boston region. And so it might impact the MPO's work in some other way, even though they're not directly engaged with it.
Okay, so thanks. I think, I guess it would be interesting or more transparent if there was some way of reporting that stuff that happens in between. I don't know if to, I don't, yeah. So anyway, I don't know if we need to know about it. I just, or it's not required exactly, but if that's not being, I don't know. Anyway, I think it would just be useful to, if there's some way of like sort of communicating that to the committee. So.
Sure, Hiral.
Thanks.
I just want to add that when we present the schedule of operations every quarter, those studies that do come in throughout the year, for example, MBTA or MassDOT, any of the agency studies that we do not have in the UPWP document, we do report on that through the schedule of operations.
And we generally also present work scopes to the MPO. Is that what you were about to say, Annette?
Yeah.
So it may not get totally placed in context within the whole UPWP, but the MPO does see the individual work scopes for those tasks.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
And I guess I'll throw my own 2 cents on the proposals. From my perspective, I think a proposal 1 makes the most sense, just to keep the work that the MPO staff is doing and in one place and separate from work that's not being done by the MPO staff. Because I mean, essentially the Appendix A functions as an FYI, whereas Chapter 5 is a little more, you know, here's what your staff is up to on for other agencies. And so I think it's important to maintain that distinction in some way.
I'm happy to proceed with that. All right.
Any other thoughts?
Do we need a vote or we're all set?
All set. Don't need a vote on this.
Excellent.
All right. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. So barring any other discussion, I'll move on to the next agenda item. Agenda item number 6, I believe. It's recording of the UPWP committee meetings. Sandy?
Yeah, thanks. This should be a nice short agenda item. Couple of things to discuss. First one is, you may have noticed if you read through the meeting summary that the committee approved today, it was a little bit more concise than in the past. I know for the MPO meetings, we're really working on making the meeting minutes much more concise, especially now that we have transcripts being generated automatically by the recordings from Zoom. And so I actually used the Zoom transcript to prepare this meeting summary. And I just wanted to get any feedback on that, see if the committee is all right with kind of making the meeting summaries a little bit more concise and not going into as much detail as I have traditionally been doing. And then the second question is just really, does anyone object to putting the UPWP committee meetings on YouTube? We've been doing that, the recordings of the NPO meetings on YouTube, and I would just want to, I thought for transparency's sake, it would be a good idea to start doing that for the UPWP committee meetings, and wanted to make sure nobody had any objections to that.
Ben?
No objections. I mean, to putting it on YouTube. In fact, appreciate it because you can go back and look at stuff if necessary. And along those lines, will the transcripts be made available?
We can, if you're interested. They do require significant editing, so it's not something that we're going to put out publicly. But if you're interested, Len, I can make a practice of emailing it to you after the meetings.
Well, I mean, I don't want to create more work. I mean, so you're not going to edit those. You wouldn't edit those anyways, right? You just extract what you need from them,
correct,
and make them available. So the YouTube videos will be available because right now I think the audio is available from the meetings on the CTPS website. That'll continue to be the case, or not?
So I don't know what we're going to do once we go back to being in person, whenever that is.
Yeah.
But you know, so I can't promise anything. But for now, I think the YouTube would be the only audio or visual recording that we would be offering.
All right. Well, as long as there is a more detailed record of the meetings available in some way, in perpetuity, as much as anything is, then I'm all for it. What I like about the very detailed notes, especially since I had to go back and read some of them, not had to, but wanted to, when we were doing the metrics, is really good. To get some real insights into what people were saying and thinking at those meetings. And I don't care how I have to do it when I want to do it. I just really want the information to be there. So that's it. Thanks.
David?
So I think if you put the meetings on YouTube, as long as we are confident that that's, stable and accessible for the longer term, right? Which I'm not exactly sure. But if we think that, then I think that, Sandy, you could definitely, spend less time on such detailed minutes as long as the minutes are good enough. and free yourself up to work on something else. That's my opinion.
Yeah, and Sandy, I assume y'all will keep the recordings on hand sort of locally as well in the event that.
Yeah, that's a Matt Archer question, but Matt, are you saving them locally as well?
I am, yes.
Okay, I figured. Thank you.
Yep.
Was that a hand up with Tom Bent or? Yeah.
Yeah, looks like it. Hey, Tom.
All right, Sandy, I just wanted to say I agree with David on that. I think that makes sense. And if it's a little bit less work for you, I'm all for it.
Much appreciated.
Lynn?
Yeah, so can I ask Matt, how is he saving them locally?
Sure. So I am putting them onto our network at work through a remote connection, and I'm also saving them to a backup hard drive locally here.
All right, so on the network, it gets backed up again, right? Because just having done IT is like things can go away. And then the more important thing is that when formats begin to change, that the data gets translated into that format, because I think we all have stuff on media that we can no longer access because the slots on the computers just don't exist anymore. Okay, thanks.
And then I have a question that maybe can wait till after the meeting, but I'll say it here just in case there's a quick answer. Are staff making captions to include into YouTube or using YouTube? I know they auto caption as well. So I just don't know what the policy is on that.
At the moment, we only have the auto captions on the YouTube videos. I think that putting captions on, I would need to look into how to effectively do that. But I think that if we were basing it off of the transcripts from the Zoom meetings, that it wouldn't greatly differ from the auto captions generated by Google or YouTube rather.
Great. Any other thoughts on the YouTube recording? Sounds like general vibe check. Everyone's pretty comfortable with it. So awesome. So looking at the agenda, the next item is agenda item number 7, coordinating with other MPOs. And I believe we're going to table this for the next MPO meeting. I know we just had a UZA coordination meeting yesterday, so there's a lot to digest there. So we want to make sure we're bringing sort of full information to the UPWP committee.
What did you just have? What kind of coordination meeting?
Urbanized area coordination meeting for
Cool.
this with some of the neighboring MPOs.
Cool. Well, this was the item that I was most looking forward to. That's okay. That's okay. I'll wait. I'll have to wait.
Ben, may I clarify? You said the next MPO meeting, but you also you meant the next UPWP, right?
Yes.
Just checking. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so we'll move on to agenda item number 8, members items. Any board members have any other items to bring before the UPWP committee? All right, not seeing any. I think the only item I have is if you haven't filled out the survey or sent some study ideas to Sandy, go right ahead and we can get those into the universe. Agenda item number 9, the next meeting. I believe it sounded like we're going to do that on the on March 4th. Is that correct, Sandy?
That was my understanding.
All right, so look forward to that. Harald, did you have something about the next meeting?
No, I just wanted to mention that I will be sending out the schedule of operations and the federal spending for our first quarter in the next week.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so look forward to the schedule of operations and we can discuss that as well at the next meeting. All right, so is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
All right, thank you. So without objection, we are adjourned. See y'all in 15 minutes.